The dusty stagecoach pulled up to the Blackwood Ranch on a hot summer day in 1887. Martha Henderson stepped down carefully, her worn brown dress catching on the wooden step. She carried everything she owned in a small cloth bag, a few dresses, her mother's Bible, and a silver locket that held her parents' picture. At 23, Martha had already faced more hardship than most women twice her age. After her parents died of fever back in Missouri, she had no choice but to find work far from home. The advertisement in the newspaper had seemed like a blessing. Housekeeper wanted for ranch in Colorado Territory. Good wages, room and board. Provided, respectable position for honest woman. Martha had spent her last coins on the stagecoach ticket, hoping this job would give her a fresh start and maybe enough money to eventually bring her younger sister west. Samuel Blackwood walked out to greet her, and Martha felt a wave of relief. He was a tall man in his 40s with graying hair and clean clothes. He tipped his hat politely and spoke in a gentle voice. "Miss Henderson, I presume? Welcome to my ranch. I hope your journey wasn't too difficult." Martha smiled for the first time in weeks. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. I'm grateful for this opportunity." He showed her around the large ranch house, explaining her duties. The house was impressive, bigger than any building Martha had ever lived in. There were fine carpets, real glass windows, and even a piano in the parlor. Blackwood explained that his wife had died 3 years earlier, and he needed someone to keep the house clean and prepare meals. He promised her a private room, regular meals, and $12 a month, more money than Martha had ever earned. "The work isn't too hard," Blackwood said, leading her to a small but clean room off the kitchen. "I'm a reasonable man, Miss Henderson. Follow the rules, do your job well, and we'll get along just fine." For the first week, everything seemed perfect. Martha threw herself into the work, scrubbing floors until they shone, preparing hearty meals, and keeping the house spotless. Blackwood was polite and kept his distance. He often complimented her cooking and thanked her for her hard work. Martha began to relax, thinking she had finally found a safe place. But slowly, things began to change. It started with small things that Martha almost didn't notice. Blackwood began watching her more closely, standing in doorways while she worked. He would ask personal questions about her past, her family, and why she had no husband. When Martha tried to change the subject, he would press for answers with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "A pretty young woman like you shouldn't be alone," he would say. "It's not natural, not safe." Martha felt uncomfortable but told herself she was being silly. Many employers were curious about their workers. She needed this job desperately, so she tried to ignore the growing unease in her stomach. The second week brought bigger changes. Blackwood announced new rules. Martha was not allowed to leave the ranch property without his permission. She couldn't receive mail unless he approved it first. She had to ask before using anything in the house, even basic supplies like soap or candles. "These are dangerous times," he explained when Martha questioned the rules. "There are rough men in these parts. I'm only thinking of your safety." Martha wanted to argue, but she remembered her empty pockets and her sister back home who was counting on her. She nodded and accepted the rules, even though they made her feel like a prisoner rather than an employee. By the third week, Blackwood's behavior became truly frightening. He would appear suddenly while Martha was working, standing too close, and speaking in a low voice. He began touching her arm or shoulder when he talked to her, ignoring her obvious discomfort. When Martha tried to step away, he would grab her wrist firmly. "Don't be unfriendly, Miss Henderson," he would say. "I'm being kind to you. You should be grateful." Martha realized she was in serious trouble when she tried to write a letter to her sister. She sat at the kitchen table after dinner, trying to find words to explain her situation without causing panic. Before she could finish, Blackwood appeared behind her. "What are you writing?" he demanded, snatching the letter from her hands. "Just a note to my sister, sir. To let her know I arrived safely." Blackwood read the letter, his face growing dark. "You're complaining about me," he said, though the letter contained no complaints at all. "No, sir, I would never. You're trying to turn people against me." His voice was cold now, all pretense of kindness gone. "I won't have it." He tore the letter into pieces and threw them into the fireplace. No more letters, no more contact with anyone. You work for me now, and you'll do as I say? Martha's heart pounded as she realized how isolated she was. The nearest neighbor was 15 miles away. She had no horse, no money, and no way to get help. Blackwood controlled everything, her food, her shelter, even her ability to communicate with the outside world. The next morning, Martha discovered that Blackwood had been lying about her wages. When she asked for her first month's pay, he laughed. Pay? You eat my food, sleep in my house, and wear clothes I provided? That's your payment. But the advertisement said, the advertisement was to bring you here. Now you're here and you'll work for room and board. Unless you'd prefer to try your luck in the wilderness? Martha knew she had no choice. Winter was coming and she would die alone in the mountains. But staying meant accepting whatever Blackwood demanded, and his demands were becoming more frightening every day. The final breaking point came on a cold October evening. Martha was washing dishes when Blackwood cornered her in the kitchen. This time, he didn't bother with polite conversation. He grabbed her roughly and tried to kiss her. Martha fought back, pushing him away and running toward her room. You can't run from me forever, he called after her. This is my house, my land. You belong to me now. That night, Martha huddled in her room, a chair pushed against the door. She could hear Blackwood pacing in the hallway outside. She knew, now that he had planned this from the beginning. The advertisement, the isolated location, the gradual removal of her freedom, it was all a trap. As she sat in the darkness, Martha remembered what one of the ranch hands had told her when he thought Blackwood couldn't hear. You're not the first housekeeper he's hired, the man had whispered. The last one disappeared last winter, just vanished one day. Blackwood said she ran off, but the man hadn't finished his sentence, but Martha understood. She was trapped with a dangerous man who had complete control over her life. If she stayed, she might end up like the previous housekeeper. If she ran, she would face the wilderness. With no supplies, no money, and no knowledge of the land. But as Martha sat in her small room, listening to Blackwood's footsteps in the hall, she made a decision. She would rather die free in the mountains than live as his prisoner. Tomorrow, when he rode out to check the cattle, she would run. She had no idea that this desperate choice would lead to the greatest adventure of her life. Martha barely slept that night. Every sound in the house made her jump, the wind rattling the windows, the old wood creaking, and worst of all, Blackwood's heavy footsteps pacing back and forth in the hallway. She knew he was waiting, planning something terrible for the morning. Her hands shook as she quietly gathered the few things she could carry. Her mother's locket, a piece of bread from dinner, and the small water canteen she used for cleaning. Dawn couldn't come fast enough. Martha pressed her ear to the door, listening for any sign of movement. Finally, she heard what she'd been praying for, the sound of Blackwood's boots on the porch, then his voice calling to the ranch hands. Through her small window she watched him mount his horse and ride toward the distant hills with two other men. They were going to check the cattle in the far pasture, something that usually took most of the day. This was her chance. Maybe her only chance? Martha's heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. She waited until the men were just tiny dots on the horizon, then carefully opened her door. The house was silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the parlor. She crept through the kitchen, grabbed a small loaf of bread, and filled her canteen with water from the well. Standing at the back door, Martha looked out at the vast wilderness that stretched endlessly in all directions. Mountains rose like giants in the distance, their peaks already white with early snow. The landscape was beautiful but deadly. She knew nothing about surviving in the wild. But staying meant certain doom, and running meant at least a chance at freedom. She stepped outside and immediately felt the bite of the cold morning air. October in Colorado was harsh and winter was coming fast. Martha had only her thin dress and a worn shawl, but there was no time to find better clothes. Every moment she delayed gave Blackwood more time to return and discover her escape. Martha chose to head east, toward what she hoped was the direction of Denver. She had heard the ranch hands mention that the city was about 50 miles away. though she had no idea how long it would take to walk that far. She followed a narrow cattle trail that wound through the scrubland, hoping it would lead her away from the ranch and toward civilization. The first few hours weren't too difficult. The morning sun warmed her back and hope gave her strength. Martha walked steadily, stopping only to sip water and catch her breath. She tried not to think about what would happen if she got lost, or what wild animals might be watching her from the rocks and bush. But as the sun climbed higher, the reality of her situation became clear. The trail split into 3 different paths, and Martha had no idea which one to take. She chose the middle path because it seemed to head toward a distant ridge, but within an hour she realized she might have made a terrible mistake. The path led to a dead end at the base of a steep cliff. Martha fought back tears as she retraced her steps. She had already wasted precious time, and her feet were beginning to hurt in her thin shoes. The bread was gone. She had eaten it too, quickly in her nervousness. The water was lasting better, but she knew she would need to find more soon. By afternoon, Martha was truly lost. The landscape all looked the same, endless rolling hills covered with sagebrush and rocks. She couldn't see the ranch anymore, but she also couldn't see any signs of a town or even a road. The sun was getting lower, and she knew that desert nights were freezing cold. That's when she heard the first howl. The sound echoed across the hills. Long and mournful, Martha's blood turned to ice. She had heard the ranch hands talking about wolf packs and mountain lions that hunted in these parts. As darkness approached, she would become easy prey for any hungry predator. Martha forced herself to keep walking, even though her legs ached and her shoes were falling apart. She needed to find shelter before dark, but there was nothing, no caves, no trees big enough to climb, just endless open ground. The howling came again, closer this time. Martha could hear multiple voices now, a whole pack calling to each other. She picked up her pace, stumbling over rocks and thorny bush. Her dress was torn in several places, and her hands were bleeding from falls. Just as the sun touched the horizon, Martha spotted something that made her heart leap, a small creek, winding through a valley below. Where there was water, there might be travelers, or at least better shelter. She half ran, half fell down the slope, desperate to reach the water before full darkness. The creek was shallow but clean. Martha drank deeply, then looked around for somewhere to spend the night. She found a small overhang of rock that would protect her from the wind and hide her from prowling animals. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. That first night was the longest of Martha's life. She huddled against the rock, shivering uncontrollably as the temperature dropped. Every sound made her jump: the hoot of an owl, the rustle of small animals in the brush, and worst of all, the distant howling that seemed to circle her hiding place. She dozed fitfully, waking every few minutes to listen for danger. When dawn finally came, Martha was exhausted and so cold she could barely move her fingers. But she was alive, and that was more than she had dared hope for. The second day was harder than the first. Martha's feet were blistered and bleeding. Her lips were cracked from thirst, and hunger gnawed at her stomach. She followed the creek, hoping it would lead to a settlement, but the landscape remained empty and hostile. Around midday, she faced her first real test. A mountain lion appeared on a ridge above her, its golden eyes fixed on her movement. Martha froze, remembering what the ranch hands had said about big cats: never run, never turn your back, make yourself look bigger, for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Martha and the lion stared at each other. Her heart hammered so hard she was sure the animal could hear it. Slowly, carefully, she picked up a large rock and raised it over her head. The lion watched her for a moment longer, then turned and padded away into the rocks. Martha sank to her knees, shaking with relief. She had survived her first encounter with the wilderness, but she knew there would be more. The third day brought new challenges. Martha's water was running low, and she hadn't eaten anything in 2 days. She tried chewing on some berries she found, but they tasted bitter and made her stomach hurt. She was getting weaker, and her mind was starting to play tricks on her. Sometimes she thought she heard voices calling her name, but when she looked around, there was nothing but empty land. Worse, she was beginning to hear something else: the distant sound of horses and dogs. Blackwood had discovered her escape and was tracking her. She could hear the baying of hounds carried on the wind. Getting closer each hour, Martha pushed herself harder, stumbling along the creek bed as fast as her damaged feet would carry her. She had come too far to be dragged back now, but deep down she knew the truth. She was lost, starving, and exhausted. Blackwood was gaining ground with every hour. Just when she thought she couldn't take another step, Martha heard something that made her heart leap with desperate hope. It wasn't the howl of wolves or the bark of tracking dogs. It was the sound she had been praying for, the lowing of cattle somewhere ahead. Where there were cattle, there might be cowboys, and where there were cowboys, there might be help. Martha stumbled forward on her bleeding feet, following the sound of cattle. Her vision was blurry from exhaustion and hunger, but she forced herself to keep moving. The lowing grew stronger, and through the haze of her desperation she could make out dark shapes moving in the distance. Hope flickered in her chest like a dying flame where there were cattle. There had to be people. The creek had led her into a small valley surrounded by rocky hills. About 100 yards ahead, she could see a small herd of cattle grazing peacefully near the water. They looked well cared for, their coats healthy and their movements calm. This wasn't wild livestock. Someone was managing this herd. Martha's legs gave out just as she reached the edge of the grazing area. She fell to her knees beside the creek, her hands shaking as she cupped water to her parched lips. The cattle looked up at her with mild curiosity but didn't seem alarmed. She had never been so grateful to see any living creatures in her life. Then she heard it, the sound that made her blood freeze. Behind her, carried on the wind, came the unmistakable baying of hunting dogs. Blackwood's voice echoed across the hills, shouting orders to his men. They were close now, maybe only a mile away. Martha tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't support her. 3 days of walking, little food, and constant fear had pushed her body beyond its limits. "Please," she whispered to the empty air. "Please, someone help me." As if in answer to her prayer, a horse whinnied somewhere nearby. Martha turned her head and saw a rider approaching from behind a cluster of rocks. Her heart pounded. Was this one of Blackwood's men? Had they found her already? But as the rider came closer, Martha could see this wasn't anyone from the ranch. The man was younger than Blackwood, probably in his early 30s, with sun-weathered skin and kind eyes. He wore the typical clothes of a working cowboy: leather, chaps, a worn hat, and a practical shirt rolled up at the sleeves. Most importantly, he was alone. The cowboy pulled up his horse a few yards away, taking in Martha's appearance with growing concern. Her dress was torn and dirty, her face was streaked with tears and dust, and she was clearly on the verge of collapse. But it was the look in her eyes that told him everything, pure terror mixed with desperate hope. "Ma'am," he said gently, dismounting from his horse, "are you hurt? What are you doing out here alone?" Martha tried to speak, but only a croak came out. The cowboy quickly pulled a water bottle from his saddle and knelt beside her, helping her take small sips. The water was cool and clean, better than anything she had ever tasted. "Easy now," he said softly. "Take your time." "Please," Martha finally managed to whisper, "you have to help me. He's coming. He's going to find me." The cowboy's expression grew serious. "Who's coming? Who are you running from?" Before Martha could answer, the sound of barking dogs grew much louder. The cowboy stood up, his hand moving instinctively to the gun at his hip. Through the rocks came the sound of horses moving fast and men shouting to each other. "There!" came Blackwood's voice, much closer now. "The dogs have picked up her scent by the creek." The cowboy looked down at Martha, then at the approaching sounds, and made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "Can you ride?" he asked quickly. Martha nodded, though she wasn't sure if she actually could. The cowboy helped her to her feet and boosted her up onto his horse. "Hold on tight," he said, swinging up behind her. "We're going to get you out of here." Just as they started to move, 3 riders burst through the rocks into the valley. Blackwood was in the lead, his face dark with rage. Behind him rode 2 ranch hands, both armed and looking grim. The hunting dogs ran alongside them, barking excitedly. "Stop right there," Blackwood shouted, pulling his horse to a halt. "That woman is my property. She's a thief and a runaway." The cowboy felt Martha tense in his arms. "She's not anyone's property," he called back, his voice steady and calm. "And she doesn't look like a thief to me." Blackwood's face grew redder. "You don't understand, stranger? She's my housekeeper. She stole money from me and ran off. I'm taking her back to face justice. Is that true?" the cowboy asked Martha quietly. "No," Martha whispered. "I never stole anything. He trapped me. He wouldn't let me leave. He tried to—" She couldn't finish the sentence, but the cowboy understood. He had seen this kind of situation before. During his years working ranches across the territory, he had encountered men who used their power to control and abuse women. His own sister had died trying to escape such a man back in Texas. The memory of finding her body still haunted his nightmares. "She's coming with me," the cowboy announced, his voice firm. Blackwood's hand moved to his gun. "I don't think so. That woman belongs to me, and I'm taking her back." The tension in the valley was thick enough to cut with a knife. Martha could feel the cowboy's muscles tense as he prepared for trouble. She had brought danger to this stranger who was only trying to help her. "You don't want to do this," the cowboy said calmly, though his hand was now resting on his own weapon. "There's 3 of you, but I know this country better than you do. And I don't think you want to explain to the territorial marshal why you shot an unarmed woman and the man trying to protect her." Blackwood hesitated. He was used to controlling isolated women who had nowhere to turn for help. But this cowboy was different. He was armed, confident, and clearly willing to fight. More importantly, he was a witness to what was really happening. "This isn't over," Blackwood snarled. "I know people in Denver. I have friends in the territorial government. You can't hide her forever." "Maybe not," the cowboy replied. "But I can hide her long enough." Without another word, he spurred his horse forward. But instead of running straight away, he did something that surprised everyone. He rode directly toward Blackwood and his men. At the last second, he swerved sharply to the left, using his knowledge of the terrain to disappear into a narrow canyon that the other men hadn't noticed. The canyon was barely wide enough for one horse, with high walls on both sides. Blackwood's men tried to follow, but their horses balked at the narrow entrance. By the time they found another way around, the cowboy and Martha had vanished into the maze of canyons and rock formations that only someone who had spent years in this country could navigate. For the next 2 days, the cowboy led Martha through hidden passages and secret trails that his grandfather had taught him during his childhood. The old man had been a scout for the army and knew every rock, every water source, and every hiding place in hundreds of square miles. They rode by night and rested during the day, always staying ahead of their pursuers. The cowboy shared his food and water with Martha, and gradually she began to trust him. His name was Thomas McKenna, and he had been driving cattle to market when he found her by the creek dot as they rode through the moonlit canyons. Martha told Thomas her story. She spoke of her parents' death, her desperate need for work, and how Blackwood had trapped her at the ranch. She told him about the previous housekeeper who had disappeared, and how she had feared she would meet the same fate. Thomas listened, without judgment, his anger growing with each detail. When Martha finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "My sister went through something similar," he finally said. "Back in Texas, a ranch owner who thought he owned her. She tried to run." But ... double quotes, he didn't finish the sentence, but Martha understood. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "So am I," Thomas replied. "But I couldn't save her. Maybe I can save you." As dawn broke on their 3rd day together, they finally reached safety, a small frontier town where Thomas had friends who would help them. But as they rode toward the settlement, both of them knew that something had changed between them. What had started as a rescue had become something deeper, something that would change both their lives forever. The small frontier town of Cedar Ridge appeared through the morning mist like a dream. Martha had never been so happy to see wooden buildings and chimney smoke in her entire life. After 3 days of hiding in canyons and sleeping under the stars, the sight of civilization felt like a miracle. Thomas guided his horse down the main street, which was really just a wide dirt path lined with a few dozen buildings. There was a general store, a saloon, a small church, and a handful of houses where the townspeople lived. It wasn't much, but to Martha it looked like paradise. "We'll be safe here," Thomas said softly. "The sheriff is a good man, and Blackwood won't dare try anything with witnesses around." They stopped at the general store, where Thomas helped Martha down from the horse. Her legs were shaky after so many hours of riding, but she managed to walk inside. The store owner, a kindly woman named Mrs. Patterson, took one look at Martha's torn dress and exhausted face and immediately understood that something terrible had happened. "You poor dear," Mrs. Patterson said, leading Martha to a chair in the back room. "You look like you've been through hell itself. Thomas, what happened to this girl?" Thomas explained the situation while Mrs. Patterson cleaned Martha's wounds. "And gave her fresh clothes?" The woman's face grew darker with each detail of the story. "I've heard rumors about that Blackwood fellow," she said, shaking her head. "Nothing good. You did the right thing helping her, Thomas." After Martha had eaten her first real meal in days and gotten cleaned up, Thomas suggested they walk to the edge of town where they could talk privately. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. They found a spot on a small hill overlooking the valley, where Thomas built a small campfire. For the first time since her escape, Martha felt truly safe. The warmth of the fire, the solid ground beneath her, and Thomas's steady presence all combined to make her feel like she might actually survive this nightmare. "I can't thank you enough," she said, watching the flames dance. "You saved my life. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." Thomas was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. "You don't owe me anything," he said finally. "I did what any decent person would do." "No," Martha replied firmly. "Not everyone would have risked their life for a stranger. You could have been killed back there." Thomas smiled sadly. "I told you about my sister, Helen. She was 2 years younger than me and the sweetest person you ever met. When she died, I swore I would never let another woman suffer like she did. Not if I could prevent it." They sat in comfortable silence. For a while, both lost in their own thoughts. Martha found herself studying Thomas's face in the firelight. He had strong features and honest eyes, and there was something about him that made her feel safe in a way she hadn't felt in months. "What will you do now?" Thomas asked eventually. "Do you have family somewhere, friends who could help you?" Martha's heart sank. She had been so focused on escaping from Blackwood that she hadn't really thought about what would happen next. "I have a sister back in Missouri," she said, "but I don't have money for a train ticket. And even if I did, Blackwood said he has friends in the territorial government. What if he really can have me arrested as a thief?" Thomas frowned. "You never stole anything from him." "I know that, and you know that, but who's going to believe the word of a poor housekeeper against a wealthy rancher? I have no proof of what really happened." The more Martha thought about it, the more hopeless her situation seemed. Even if she could get back to Missouri, what would she do there? She had no money, no job prospects, and now she would always be looking over her shoulder, wondering if Blackwood might come after her. Thomas seemed to be thinking about the same problems. "There might be a way," he said slowly. "Something that would protect you legally and give you a fresh start." "What do you mean?" Thomas turned to face her, and Martha could see something intense in his eyes. "Martha, I know this is going to sound crazy. We've only known each other for 3 days, and those weren't exactly normal circumstances. But I think there's a way to solve your problem." Martha's heart began to beat faster. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that maybe we could help each other." Thomas took a deep breath. "If you were married, Blackwood couldn't touch you. A married woman has legal protections that a single woman doesn't have. And if you had a husband to speak for you, people would be more likely to believe your story." Martha stared at him in shock. Are you asking me to marry you?" "I know it sounds insane," Thomas said quickly. "We barely know each other." "But Martha, I've been thinking about this all day. It's not just about protecting you from Blackwood. These past 3 days, riding with you, talking to you, seeing your courage, I think I'm falling in love with you." Martha felt like the world was spinning around her. "Thomas, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything right now," he replied. Just think about it. I'm not asking you to marry me just for protection, though that would be part of it. I'm asking because I think we could have a real life together, a good life. Martha's mind was racing. Marriage to Thomas would solve her immediate problems. She would have legal protection, a home, and someone to take care of her. But more than that, she realized she had genuine feelings for this man who had risked everything to save her. But you don't really know me, she said. What if I'm not the kind of woman you think I am? What if I disappoint you? Thomas smiled. Martha, I've seen you at your worst, scared, exhausted, running for your life, and you know what? You were still brave, you still had hope. You still treated me with kindness even when you had every reason to be suspicious of men. If that's who you are at your lowest point, then I think I know enough. Martha felt tears starting to form in her eyes. I don't have anything to offer you. No money, no dowry, no family connections, just myself. That's all I want, Thomas said. Softly, just you. They sat in silence for several minutes, both staring into the fire. Martha's practical mind was telling her this was the smartest thing she could do. Marriage to Thomas would give her security and protection. But her heart was telling her something else, that she was genuinely attracted to this kind, brave man, who had already proven he would do anything to keep her safe. Can I ask you something? Martha said finally. Anything. If we do this, would it be a real marriage? Or just a business arrangement? Thomas reached over and gently took her hand. It would be whatever you wanted it to be. I won't pressure you into anything you're not ready for. But I hope in time it could be a real marriage, a partnership built on love and respect. Martha looked into his eyes and saw nothing but sincerity. This man had already proven himself to be honorable and trustworthy. He had risked his life for her without asking for anything in return. And if she was honest with herself, she was already half in love with him. There's something else, Thomas continued. I own a small ranch about 50 miles from here. Nothing. Fancy, but it's mine, free and clear. We could build a life there together. You'd never have to worry about money or security again. Martha felt a warmth spreading through her chest. For the first time in months, she was being offered not just safety, but a future. A real future with a man who seemed to genuinely care. About her, Thomas, she said softly. Are you sure about this? Really sure? I've never been more sure of anything in my life, he replied. Martha took a deep breath. Then yes, I'll marry you. Thomas's face broke into a huge smile. He leaned forward and gently kissed her forehead. You won't regret this, Martha. I promise you that. As they sat by the fire, planning their future together, Martha realized that sometimes the most desperate situations could lead to the most wonderful possibilities. She had run from one life in terror, only to find another, life filled with hope and love. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, with golden sunlight streaming through the windows of the small boarding house where Martha had spent the night. Mrs. Patterson had insisted she stay in the guest room, refusing to accept any payment from Thomas. A woman needs a proper place to prepare for her wedding day, she had said with a knowing smile. Martha stood at the window, watching the townspeople begin their daily routines. In a few hours she would be married to a man she had known for only 4 days. The thought should have terrified her, but instead she felt a strange peace. Thomas had proven himself to be honorable and kind, and more importantly, he had given her something she had thought was lost forever, hope for the future. Mrs. Patterson knocked softly on the door. Come in, Martha called. The older woman entered, carrying a beautiful blue dress. This was my wedding dress 40 years ago, she said with tears in her eyes. I've been saving it for my daughter, but she moved to California and got married there. I'd be honored if you'd wear it today. Martha touched the soft fabric with trembling fingers. I can't accept this. It's too precious. Nonsense, Mrs. Patterson replied firmly. Every bride deserves to feel beautiful on her wedding day. Besides, that dress has been waiting in my closet for years. It needs to fulfill its purpose. As Martha changed into the dress, she thought about how much her life had changed in just 1 week. 7 days ago, she had been trapped and terrified, believing she might die at Blackwood's ranch. Now she was preparing to marry a good man who had risked everything to save her. The dress fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Mrs. Patterson helped her fix her hair and even lent her a small silver necklace that had belonged to her grandmother. Something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue, she recited with a smile. Meanwhile, Thomas was getting ready at the saloon, where the local men had gathered to wish him well. The saloon keeper, a gruff man named Murphy, had known Thomas for years and was surprised by the sudden wedding. "You sure about this, Thomas?" Murphy asked while helping him with his tie. "She seems like a nice girl, but you've only known her a few days." Thomas smiled. "Sometimes a few days is enough to know everything that matters. She's brave, kind, and she's been through hell without losing her spirit. That tells me more about her character than months of courtship could." The other men nodded approvingly. In the frontier, people learned to judge character quickly. There wasn't time for long courtships when life was dangerous and uncertain. At 10 o'clock, the small church bell began to ring. The entire town had turned out for the wedding, not because they knew Martha and Thomas well, but because weddings were rare celebrations in isolated communities. Everyone needed a reason to smile and dance. Pastor Williams, an elderly man with kind eyes and a white beard, had agreed to perform the ceremony on short notice. He stood at the altar, Bible in hand, as the townspeople filled the wooden pews. Thomas waited nervously at the front of the church, wearing his best shirt and a new tie that Mrs. Patterson had found for him. His hands were shaking slightly, but his face was filled with joy and determination. Then the door opened, and Martha walked in on the arm of Sheriff Davidson, who had volunteered to give her away. The entire congregation turned to look, and there was a collective intake of breath. Martha looked radiant in the blue dress, her face glowing with happiness despite everything she had been through. Thomas felt his heart stop for a moment. He had thought Martha was beautiful when he first saw her by the creek, even dirty and frightened. But now, walking toward him with confidence and hope in her eyes, she was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. The ceremony was simple but meaningful. Pastor Williams spoke about love, commitment, and the courage it takes to build a life together. When he asked if anyone objected to the marriage, everyone held their breath for a moment, half expecting Blackwood to burst through the doors. But the church remained peaceful. "Do you, Thomas McKenna, take Martha to be your wife, to love and protect her in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Thomas said firmly, his voice carrying to every corner of the church. "And do you, Martha Henderson, take Thomas to be your husband, to love and honor him, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live?" Martha looked into Thomas's eyes and saw nothing but love and sincerity. "I do," she said clearly. They exchanged simple gold rings that Mrs. Patterson had somehow managed to find in her jewelry box. As Pastor Williams pronounced them husband and wife, the entire congregation erupted in cheers and applause. Thomas kissed Martha gently, and she felt tears of joy streaming down her face. For the first time in months, she felt truly safe and loved. The celebration continued outside the church, where the townspeople had set up tables with food and drink. Murphy had brought his fiddle, and soon people were dancing in the street. Martha and Thomas had their first dance as husband and wife while the whole town watched and cheered, but their happiness was interrupted by the arrival of an unexpected visitor. Sheriff Davidson approached Thomas with a serious expression. "I hate to interrupt," he said quietly, "but there's news about Blackwood." Thomas felt Martha tense beside him. "What kind of news?" "A deputy marshal arrived from Denver this morning. Seems there's been an investigation into Blackwood's activities. You're not the first woman to escape from his ranch, Martha." 3 others have come forward with similar stories, Martha gasped. "Are they safe?" "They are now," the sheriff replied. "And there's more." When the marshal searched Blackwood's ranch, they found evidence of even worse crimes. The previous housekeeper, the one who disappeared? They found her grave hidden in the hills behind the ranch. Martha felt sick to her stomach. She could have ended up like that poor woman if she hadn't found the courage to run. Blackwood has been arrested, Sheriff Davidson continued. He's being held in Denver, waiting for trial. The territorial judge says he'll likely spend the rest of his life in prison. Thomas put his arm around Martha protectively. So she's really safe now? Completely safe, the sheriff confirmed. Blackwood will never hurt another woman again. Martha began to cry, but this time they were tears of relief and joy. The nightmare was truly over. She was free, she was married to a wonderful man, and the monster who had terrorized her was finally facing justice. As the celebration continued into the evening, Martha and Thomas talked about their future. Thomas's ranch was a day's ride away, nestled in a beautiful valley with good water and fertile soil. He had been working alone for years, but with Martha's help, they could build something truly special. "I want to raise horses," Thomas said, as they sat together watching the sunset. "Good horses that can help people travel safely through this territory. And maybe someday we'll have children who can grow up free and happy," Martha smiled. "I'd like that, all of it." They spent their first night as husband and wife in the boarding house, talking and planning until dawn. Martha told Thomas about her dreams of having a real home, a place where she could plant flowers and bake bread and feel safe every day. Thomas shared his hopes of building a prosperous ranch and maybe even starting a town where good people could live peacefully. A week later, they rode out to Thomas's ranch together. The small house was simple but well built, with a stone fireplace and windows that looked out over rolling hills. Martha immediately began making plans for a garden, and Thomas showed her the corral where they would train their horses. Years later, when people asked Martha about her wedding day, she would tell them that sometimes the most beautiful beginnings come from the darkest times. Her escape from Blackwood's ranch had seemed like certain death, but instead, it had led her to the love of her life and a future she had never dared to dream. The McKenna Ranch became famous throughout the territory for its fine horses and the kindness of its owners. Martha and Thomas raised 4 children together, and their home became a place where travelers could always find a warm meal and a safe place to rest. And sometimes, when young women in difficult situations came to their door asking for help, Martha would sit them down and tell them her story. She would remind them that courage doesn't mean not being afraid. It means taking action despite your fear. And that sometimes when you're brave enough to run toward freedom, you might just run straight into love.